just want you to be happy. I'm trying all the time.
This place prompted memories.
That's what rooms do. They hold these stories.
Some of them are uncomfortable.
We're here now. And that was then. I'm not sure I feel I have a right to do such a thing. It feels like trespassing. Happy birthday, Mum. To us.
Good afternoon and welcome to Washington Post Live. I'm Ann Hornaday, Chief Film Critic here at the Post, and I am truly delighted to be in conversation today with one of the most highly acclaimed actors in Hollywood and yea, verily, the world, Tilda Swinton. Hi, Tilda.
Hello. Very nice to see you.
It's great to see you. Thank you for joining us. And where are you joining us from today? I think you're far flung as usual.
I'm actually in Denmark. Very rarely am I here, but I'm here preparing a project very happily in the snow, away from other things. So yes, I managed to find this very valuable time to talk to you.
Oh, and we're so very grateful, and we do have so much to talk about, but I can't wait to dive into The Eternal Daughter. So delicious. It's so great to see so much of you, and in this, as the intro said, this fascinating dual role. This is a movie that purposely leaves itself open to myriad interpretations. It's already sparking lots of conversations, but I wanted to start, what does it mean to you? What do you think this movie is about?
Well, in the first instance, I have to declare at the border that it means a lot to me, this movie. It's a film that Joanna Hogg and I have in many ways been working towards for 50 years. Joanna is, if not my oldest friend, my most long-standing friend. I've known her since I was 10 and she was 11. And in many ways, I think we have to face up to the fact that we've been talking about our mothers and our relationships with our mothers and the mysteries of our mothers ever since we met. And this film is a very personal film for both of us. So it's very precious. What it means to me, and what I think it addresses, is something about spirit and this eternal question of where do we begin and our mother end? I mean, and where do we end and our child begin? I think it's really a question we all ask ourselves all the time at every age, but particularly when we have elderly mothers in particular. I mean, I think it can also be meaningful for people with elderly fathers, but there's something about giving your mother up that this film addresses that I don't think it's comfortable for us to look at very often. So it's a great honor to look at it with Joanna here.
Oh, you're so right. And what makes it sort of it's such a it's a recursive piece because it refers back, of course, to the two souvenir films that Joanna did that were really breakouts. I mean, I've been following her career for a long time and had been a huge fan. So those lucky, few of us who knew of her already were so happy to see her finally reach a wider audience. But of course, those were films that were semi-autobiographical, with the character Julie Hart, played by your daughter, Honor Swinton Byrne. So there's this wonderful, not just doubling, but tripling and quadrupling quality to this project.
Well, for those who don't know, aren't both lucky and clever enough to know Joanna's work, and as you are, her work is always fairly closely autobiographical. Her first film, Unrelated, which I personally believe is a kind of masterpiece, particularly coming as a first feature, sort of set the tone for a kind of self-revelation and a sort of atmosphere of reverie that she's followed through all her films. And the souvenir films were very clearly about a period in her life that I remember very well. I was sort of around at the time when she had this particular relationship and was becoming a filmmaker. And when she first asked me to play the mother, which of course was sort of loosely based on her own mother, with a smattering of my mother in there, and various other mothers we've known, I was very, very happy and privileged to say yes, because it was also approaching my own autobiography in a way. And then, of course, she was looking for the girl for the longest time, and I was giving her all sorts of names. And at the very last minute, I mean, pretty much the very last minute, thought of someone much closer to home who happened to be the perfect person to play the daughter, my own daughter, Honor. And for when we started to talk about the Eternal Daughter, which, as I've said, we were sort of approaching for years and years and years, but when we started getting quite concrete about the project, the film we might make, we didn't originally think that it would be about Julie and Rosalind. I was always going to play the younger woman, and we were thinking for a long time about finding someone older. Again, not necessarily a performer, but a person, a human, usually, not always, to play their mother. And then we just made the souvenirs and were a little besotted with Rosalind, I have to confess. We were very, very drawn to her and this particular portrait of someone who, let's not say she was, I mean, she was sort of influenced by both our mothers, but let's say she was someone our mothers might have known. That we then decided to build it around Rosalind, and then we thought, well, hang on, who are you going to play then? And there was this moment when I suggested, in the way in which you can only suggest something like that with someone you've known since you were 10, why don't I play both? And then the film was born, because, of course, for those who have seen the film, and for those who have not yet, you will discover it actually had to be played by one person. The entire film had to be, these two portraits had to be carried by one person. So yes, it wasn't always going to be linked in this way to the souvenirs. It's certainly not a third part or anything, but it does have a relationship for sure, because Julie and Rosalind are there, and another spaniel who is a descendant of the spaniels who we met in the souvenirs.
Oh, that's so great. I'm so glad to know that, because part of Rosalind, part of the vividness of her character in the souvenir films are the dogs, and just the way it's just immediately recognizable, right? That woman, that family. So to the point that it only could be played by one person, I want to play a clip right now that I think illustrates this amazing, I was going to say dual performance, but is it really? So let's watch the clip and come back.
I got you a nice glass of wine. Thank you very much. Oh, goodness me. Are we early or late? I mean, are we the only people staying here? Have you worked that out yet? I know, I don't know. There was no one here when I arrived. Oh, look at that. Thank you very much. That's very welcome.
Oh, that just gives us delicious, tantalizing speck of the mood and the tone and the delicious psychological layers of this movie. So not to sort of break the spell, but did you have, when you're playing against yourself, was there another person? I mean, were you doing those scenes with at least another human being to play off of? I mean, tell us a little bit about how you approached the performance technically.
Well, the most significant part of the work, of course, was the bedrock of the way in which we work together and that Joanna works, which is to improvise the dialogue entirely. There is no screenplay as such, there's no script. And there's a sort of document, almost like a short story, that she has, of course, crafted over very often many years, which I knew very well, and most members of the crew, not all, knew. but that's a very scant skeleton that will say, Julie and Rosalind have dinner, action. There isn't necessarily any guidance on what they might discuss or what they might do. And so the building of the material happens on the spot in front of the camera. This is a very particular way of working. So this is always, let's say, tantalizing, and let's say a wonderful opportunity, but also, let's say, challenging, but fascinating. And I really, really love it. And to use your word, Anne, it is delicious. And it's a really inspiring way of working, and makes writers of all of us, because we need to find our words in a very sort of productive way. But when working with oneself, it's a real chunk of change. So what we did with each of the scenes or each of the passages was we sort of figured out roughly who was going to start the dialogue, who was going to start the action or start the gesture of the moment. And we would start shooting that person first. And we would shoot her for however long we needed to. And for those sections, Joanna was always sort of underneath the camera or just by the camera, and I was improvising to her or with her. And then, of course, we had to be quite clear when we turned around, and I turned into the other person, that we could remember what we'd done, which wasn't always high. It's not because, of course, the film, the material, part of the material of the film is about how people find it difficult to listen to each other, how they find it difficult to communicate with one another at all, but also how difficult it is to respond and to really to be attentive to one another. So it wasn't the kind of, this is one of the joys of this kind of work, that one's not, it's not a repetitive, or it's not like a sort of finely wrought screenplay or a finely wrought play where everybody sounds like a playwright. Joanna is a great respecter, as I would say I am, of inarticulacy, of silence, of the urge to speak, but the inability to find the right words. So that's in there. So that's always a great, that's our sort of get out clause. But then we sort of filmed the other side. And when we filmed the other side, the second side, I was responding to my own memory. I was not responding to Joanna at that point. I was responding to some kind of sense memory of what I had done, or a version of what I had done as the first portrait.
And it seems to me,
rubbing your tummy or whatever that thing is that people are supposed to be able to do.
Exactly, which you're a past master, of which you are a past master. But it also seems that when you're working this way without a narrative script, a typewritten script, that you're really just playing the emotion, right? I mean, it's all subtext at that level.
It is.
Which has to, I don't know if that's more challenging or less, but does that mean more takes or fewer? Like, was this a relatively kind of one and done type of a thing, or?
No, it was something, as I said, because one's building the text in front of the camera. Well, we work with very long takes for a start. So we might, we'll shoot right to the end of a magazine and then start again. Not so many. And the editing is, of course, a really alchemical process. And Hella Lefebvre and Joanna had an extraordinary editing process of piecing it all together. And of course, mixing and matching and weaving a strange, inarticulate tapestry out of this relationship. But it's the pauses, I mean, these women, the material, the actual subject of the film is how does one reach another? And how does one reach one's mother? And how does one reach one's child? And how does one give oneself permission not to be reached by one child? That's the sort of subject. And so that gives us permission to leave these great wells of unspoken emotion and tiptoe up on the emotion that we do want to approach and we do want to articulate. But the whole thing is built on a kind of volcano of unspoken stuff.
Which who can relate to that? We all can.
Exactly.
Yes. We do have lots of audience questions, and I want to get to one right now. One, well, actually more than one, several people are asking, and you intimated this earlier, but maybe you could elaborate. Did you channel your own relationship with your mother to create your on-screen dynamic between both characters? And I might take my prerogative to add, when I too have friends from that long ago, and our mothers are almost, we were raised by each other's moms, so their mothers loom just as largely for me as my own in many ways. And I think of them all the time. So I guess I would add that in to, like, how did you build Rosalind here?
Well, when we were building Rosalind in the Souvenir films, and I think the reason that we wanted to return to her, and I must declare that Joanna and I are still very fascinated by Rosalind, and we may even return to her again, is because to look at the portrait of a mother of our mother's generation and the particular gap between a mother of that generation and a daughter of our generation was so rich for us and felt so particular. Now, I'm sure it's true that it's always going to be rich to look at the relationship between any mother and any daughter. I know that's the case. But there's something for us about a kind of a mother born when our mothers were born, who lived through the war, who came into motherhood at a time when there were all sorts of very interesting, energetic sort of force fields being broached about what a mother was and what a mother could give her daughter, what a mother could not show her daughter, how she could support her daughter, how she could guide her daughter, what she should keep from her daughter. That felt to us really like treasure. And we felt that we hadn't really seen it mined before very often, or certainly we wanted to go there. And so in answer to your first question, I did definitely think of my mother a lot during the making of Rosalind in all of these films. She's a different person to all of our mothers. She's a different person to Joanna's mother, and she's a different person to mine. But she, as I say, she shares a culture with our mothers, and she shares in many ways a kind of attitude to her daughter. I mean, all these mothers have artist daughters and don't know what to do.
Right.
and have dedicated their lives to living in a certain way in support of their husbands. And as all three of our mothers, Julie, Joanna's, and mine, all have sat to a certain extent on the artist in themselves. And one of the things that I find very moving in the Souvenirs, and to a certain extent in The Eternal Daughter, is the way in which Rosalind discovers the artist in herself and is guided by her daughter, and takes up pottery. And there's, in Souvenir 2, there's this sort of tragedy of the Etruscan pot, which, if you haven't seen Souvenir 2, you won't know what I mean, but if you have, you will know exactly what I mean. This feeling of being guided by her daughter, I find deeply touching and emblematic in many cases of that generation, because they didn't necessarily know what to make of us. We were born, those of us who were born in the 60s, into an entirely new world, very, very different to the world in which they were born into. And so they were, on the one hand, very hands-off, and on the other hand, had sort of laid down a code for us that we couldn't follow because it didn't really work anymore. Exactly.
And I think one of the struggles that this movie brought up for me was this feeling of leaving one another behind, sort of for us to go into the world the way we were conditioned to do in this, like you just said, generationally. That did mean sort of a rejection that was, I'm sure, devastating personally and emotionally for them, that we, being young and self-centered, would not have recognized at the time. And now I look back and thank God that it's that's so palpable for me in this particular film.
It's a thing that I mean, the sad thing for Julie, I find, is that because she doesn't become a mother herself, she doesn't know that she can't put a foot wrong. And what we as mothers know is that our children are immaculate and they can never fail us. But what Julie doesn't know is that she can't get it wrong. There's that heartbreaking moment when she says, "I got it wrong." And but if Rosalind were there, she would be able to explain that that's impossible. She's perfect. So I think there's that. There's just something very, very tender about the disconnect between them. They don't. I mean, there's so much chit chat and so much, in many ways, baby talk. The whole thing about the stuffed animals, and of course, the great love of Springer Spaniels. In our case, in my family, the sort of using of animals as a sort of intermediary of love, whether they're stuffed or not. That the great panic in the Eternal Daughter when Louis goes missing, it's very real, and I think that particular sort of piquancy of disconnect isn't, for example, borne out in later generations. I mean, when we made the souvenirs, my daughter Honor and I were very attentive to the fact that our relationship is very, very different. We had to really, I had to, in a way, inform her not to rely on a kind of just openness between us, because we had that. But then, you know, we're a different round. And I, as a daughter, was so thrilled to be able to have a different relationship with my children. That's my privilege, and that's their privilege as well. But it's like another country, that kind of generation.
It's so very true, and I think it's so easy to take it for granted. I'd like to. I'm aware of our time, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about. I happened to happen upon your recent appearance at the Academy Museum. You were honored with the Visionary Award at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, and once again, you delivered such a moving speech. It was just so meaningful, and you're becoming really known for these moments where you sort of crystallize the moment, you know, the cinematic moment, the cultural moment, what film means. And I just wanted to talk to you about that. You had said in the Academy talk, you said, you know, it was really a rallying cry for the humanistic mission of cinema, the humanistic potential of cinema. And you said film is good for us. And I just wanted to ask you to elaborate on that for a little bit.
I am so honored and delighted to have chances to say that sentence, and I truly believe it. I think cinema is truly sort of, it'll save us if we let it, and if we ignore it, we're really missing a trick. And one of the most beneficial things, if one can think of anything beneficial about the pandemic, is that when we were all locked in or locked up or locked down or whatever we were, all of us, not just cine nerds like me and you, missed, I would say, 4 things. We missed our friends and family, we missed traveling, we missed live music, and we missed cinema, what I call big cinema. And it was really interesting because it came at a time when people were rumbling in all sorts of ways about, oh, cinema is kind of old hat, isn't it? Don't we just want to watch Netflix on the end of our bed? And, you know, aren't the screens getting smaller? And do we really need to value big cinema? And if anything, ironically, reprised the great triumph of big cinema, it was the pandemic, because we yearn for it, we need it, and we've known it for so long. My son once asked me this incredible question when he was 8.5 of all ages. I mulled about this moment before, and I've written about it because I still can't believe that he had this wisdom. He asked me once when I was putting him to bed and wishing him a beautiful dream. He said, "Mama, what were people's dreams like before cinema?"
Oh,
And cinema is so ingrained in our. I mean, it's no coincidence, I don't think, that psychoanalysis and cinema were all kind of born at the same time. It's so important for us, and we ignore its power and its healing capacity, and the visionary nature of it. The fact that it can actually guide us. When we value big cinema, we see who we are and we see what we want. We see what our desires are, what our fears are. We need it. And we must always remember that.
I want to get to one more audience question, and then if I have time, I'd like to loop back to what you just said. But Elizabeth in Minnesota asks, what role stretched you the most?
I would say, Elizabeth, and it sounds like I'm being flippant, but I think that playing a corporate lawyer in Michael Clayton was probably the biggest stretch for my imagination. I, at that stage, had never met a corporate lawyer. And it was easier for me to imagine an immortal nobleman who wakes up as a woman than to imagine being a corporate lawyer. So I think that, I mean, I had to learn the sort of the coat. What do these people wear? How do they speak? How do they hold themselves? I didn't know. So that was probably the biggest stretch.
Look what happened. I mean, that is such, I don't think a day goes by when I don't talk about that movie. And usually it's one or two of those scenes, one of the greatest revealed in cinematic history with you and a phone call. I'll leave it there. But I mean, truly, what a masterpiece. What a great piece of filmmaking that was.
An absolutely extraordinary screenplay by Tony Gilroy, who did the thing that I hate to say it, but a lot of writers forget to do, which is to write different people in different ways, and that's what you get. You get a really classical. I felt like that was a real proper good Hollywood movie. I mean, it was a real proper Hollywood movie, and I also suggest George Clooney's greatest moment. I mean, incredible piece of performance by him.
Few would disagree, and I agree with you about it. It is sort of that quintessential. Well, and that loops back to what you were just saying in your defense of big cinema. Are you worried? I mean, we're now seeing some sort of alarming statistics about audiences returning for the big blockbusters and superhero films, but the smaller films that you're often in and that I like to champion are not drawing audiences back into theaters at quite the same rate. So do you have any sense of where we're going and how things are going to shake out?
I'm not looking at the numbers, Anne, as you are. I'm not worried, again, because I mean, for a start, I don't, if people still value big cinema for blockbusting Marvel films or whatever else, okay, they're still valuing big cinema, and we can thank big blockbusters for that, because they're keeping people on the drug. Not to be flippant, but they're the fact that it's when people, and as I say, I really don't think there will come a time when people give up on the experience of cinema. I mean, big cinema is an experience. We have to remember that. I think very often there's a mistake made to imagine that cinema is only valuable as a kind of narrative art. That it, oh, have you seen that film? Yes, what happens? It's not about that necessarily. It's not necessarily about a plot. It's not necessarily about a performance. It's not necessarily about a thrill or a car chase or a reveal. It's usually and good big pure cinema is about atmosphere and about environment and about transport and fantasy. All films are fantasies. It doesn't matter if they're set by a kitchen sink, that's still a fantasy. It doesn't even matter if they're a documentary, they're still a fantasy. You're in the eyes of a filmmaker, you're in the hands of filmmakers, and you go there with them. And I think that knowing that it's an experience, and it's also an experience going into the dark in a big room with some popcorn and a whole bunch of strangers. That's part of it. You know, there's only so much we want to look at the end of our bed or on the back of our wrist, actually. And as long as we think that it's just about remembering or following the plot, then we're going to miss out on all the treasure of big cinema. I made a film with the great Thai master Apichat Pongwirit a couple of years ago, and it was released by Neon, and extraordinarily and magisterially they gave it the release that we'd asked them to, which is to show it only in cinemas. And rather like a rock concert that you buy a ticket for 9 months in advance, when you know your favorite band is coming to town, and you take your ticket and you stick it on the back of the refrigerator or the front of the refrigerator under a magnet, and you wait. This film has been going around the States in one cinema at a time for the last year, and people have been going. And that is not a blockbuster, I can tell you that much. That is an extraordinarily experiential film about sound and spirit. And people have been lapping it up, and they have been waiting for their ticket to be checked in. They have the capacity for it. So I'm not worried. No, I'm not worried. I mean, what I would really love to see, and I've said this before, but I'll go on saying it, I would really love to see the streamers putting their money where their mouth is. If they really believe in big cinema, I'd like to see them building big theaters or resuscitating or renovating big theaters in all the towns that they reach around the globe, so that you do have the choice to watch something on the end of your bed or to go into the town and sit with a bunch of strangers in the dark. That's what I would love to see, because they've got a lot of money, so they have to spend it somehow. I would rather they did that. I would rather they use it to inform and educate and enlighten the entire population of the planet about the fact that we have more than 11 decades of cinema archive to rest on. So I would rather see them do that in a way. I shouldn't really say this, than spend a lot of money making new films. I would like to see them, raise the bar on the educational aspect of the cinema archive. But I'm not worried at all. I think no one's getting off this drug.
Oh, may it be so. May it be ever so. Tilda Swinton, we are out of time. I have to leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation. See the Eternal Daughter, revel in the greatness of Tilda Swinton. Thank you for joining us, Tilda.
Very much. Thank you. Lots of love.
And thanks to all of you for watching. This is actually our last program of 2022, if you can believe it. To learn more about our upcoming programming starting in 2023 in the new year, please visit WashingtonPostLive.com. We look forward to seeing you in 2023. Until then, I'm Ann Hornaday. Thank you for joining us.